I'm Brandon Welch. I am an associate professor at the Medical University of South Carolina. I'm also the founder and CEO of Doxy.me, which is a simple and free telemedicine solution. And today I get to talk about telemedicine usage in South Carolina, specifically looking at the data we've pulled from Doxy.me from providers and patients who've been using Doxy.me here in the state. So a little bit of background. I founded Doxy.me many years ago when I was a student, and I was working on a study where we needed to provide prenatal care to pregnant moms. And if you've ever had a child, you know that going in for prenatal care visits, it's about 14 or 15 in-person visits. That's a lot of unnecessary in-person care. So the study was all about reducing the burden of in-person care by providing access to the providers through video. And so it's my job as a technologist on the team to find a simple way to connect with patients by video for the study. And at first I was like, oh, we'll just use Skype or FaceTime because it's simple and easy to use and it's free. And every mom has got that and uses it. However, the hospital wouldn't allow us to use that because it wasn't HIPAA compliant. And so I went out and I looked for things that were video platforms that we could use for telemedicine. Unfortunately, the options that were available to us were either overly complicated, they required downloads or hardware or installation or passwords and accounts from patients. It was just too much. Or it was like overly expensive and the moms only needed to use it once or twice a month. They didn't need to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars to do this. Or it just wasn't designed for healthcare and it's designed for something like school or board meetings. And it wasn't tailored to the healthcare market or the healthcare use case. And so I said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way and make sure it was designed for healthcare. And so we created a simple, free, and secure telemedicine solution. And that's what Doxy.me is. We released Doxy.me in 2014 to the public and to go and use it. And it's grown tremendously over the last couple of years. It's used all around the world. Doxy.me is growing nicely. We were essentially doubling every year in the number of users and minutes with great growth. And then COVID hit and the entire healthcare industry shifted to telemedicine. And many of them shifted to they had that same issue. They needed something simple, that's easy to use, that worked for healthcare. And Doxy.me was perfectly suited for a lot of providers during the pandemic. That's no different here in South Carolina than everywhere else. And so, like I mentioned, the first couple of years, we were growing nicely and steadily. By February of 2020, we had about 1,000 providers here in South Carolina. But within 2 months, we had up to 8,000 providers from South Carolina that adopted Doxy.me as their telemedicine platform because they needed something. And then over the next several months, throughout 2021, we grew to about 14,000 providers. So very strong uptick, largely driven by the COVID pandemic, but we had something that resonated with a lot of providers. It was easy to use, it was simple, low cost, and it was designed for the healthcare workflows. Today, we have about 15,000 providers who have completed or who have conducted about 50 million minutes of telemedicine and over 2.8 million sessions. And so pretty significant usage here in South Carolina. Many providers talk about how some of the features that they like, and this is a quote from Dr. Myrtle Beach. Your telehealth system helped us adopt our practice to the pandemic and has now become an integral part of our practice. And so this is a common theme we see. A lot of people adopt it because of the pandemic, but is now become a standard of care and integrating into how care is provided now. Some of the other quotes we got from providers around the state, particularly in rural areas, are very easy to use and convenient, very reliable. My clients love it, reliable and easy to use, all from providers around the state who use Doxy.me. We looked at some of our Net Promoter Score responses, and we did a word cloud of the most commonly used words when they describe Doxy.me and what they like about Doxy.me. And you can see a lot of the words are easy, ease, works well, secure, love, great, quality, HIPAA, user-friendly, reliable. These are all great characteristics that providers here in South Carolina are saying about the Doxy.me platform. So let's dig in and look at who these providers are. Looking at the number of sessions conducted by physicians and behavioral and social mental health providers uh, um, are the dominant users if you look at based upon sessions. And then you have advanced nurse practitioners and PAs who are a significant chunk. Then there's others down here as well. Now, if we look at the physician specialties, there are on the Doxy.me platform in South Carolina, there are 104 different physician specialties and subspecialties on our platform. This data comes from um, NPI data, National Provider Identifier Number. We have the NPI data on about 50% of our providers, and so this is a sample of about 50% of providers in South Carolina, so it's a pretty representative sample size. But we see that of the physicians, family medical physicians, internal medical physicians are the largest. Psychiatry physicians, pediatrics are the top specialties that use Doxy.me, and that also corresponds with that's where most physicians practice in those specialties. But then it goes down OB-GYN, surgery, and on downward from there. Now, if you look at advanced nurse practitioners and PAs, you see family nurse practitioners. Again, that's the most common specialty, so it's not surprising that you see that. But family nurse practitioners and PAs, nurse practitioners, are the top specialty among advanced nurse practitioners and physician's assistants. And if you look at behavioral health specialties, there are 26 total specialties and subspecialties. And mental health counselor, professional counselor, social workers, and counselors are round out the top types of providers who use the Doxy.me platform here in South Carolina. Looking at the usage of the Doxy.me platform by day and time, we see this interesting trend where this is the average number of sessions by hour. So 12 a.m., this is noon, and you see that providers have most of the sessions occur between Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in the mornings and the afternoon. And the time of the week with the most calls or most sessions is Tuesday afternoon at 2 p.m. in South Carolina, which is interesting. But you see that late morning, mid-afternoon are the most common. Providers like to take the break for lunch. And Friday's a day where there's not as many calls happening on average than the other days of the week. What's interesting is that on average, in the middle of the night, 3 in the morning, there's about 1.5 calls happening on the platform. So I don't know who's providing care at 3 o'clock in the morning, but somebody is on average every hour of the day, except 3 a.m. on a Sunday. So I guess whatever, nobody wants to get care at that time. But it's very interesting that there is this trend in the middle of the night. I don't know who's doing it, but it's quite interesting. South Carolina providers conduct 2,500 appointments, accounting for 50,000 minutes every day on the Doxy.me platform. Now, this is the days of the week, not including Saturday and Sunday, but it's about 2,500 appointments, 50,000 minutes every single day on the platform. What's interesting is that providers, if you're looking at the location now, providers are located in 241 cities and towns across South Carolina. That's about 95% of all cities and towns in South Carolina. There's a provider there using the Doxy.me platform. Charleston and Columbia and Greenville are the highest. Mount Pleasant, which is a suburb of Charleston, is up there as well. Somerville is also a suburb of Charleston. So providers are largely located in the 3 large metropolitan areas in the state, which is not surprising. And then it goes down from there, and you see some other smaller towns and cities and villages across the state are represented as providers from these locations who are using Doxy.me. And this is a map of the provider by number of providers per location. And what's interesting is that it does correlate with the patient population. So this is just the general South Carolina population. And you see the hotspot up in the northern part of the state, hotspot in Columbia, and then down the Charleston area and a little bit in Myrtle Beach. And you see that same trend here, that the providers are up here, scattered up here, centralized largely in Columbia, and then a good spattering here in Charleston as well. And this is where it makes sense. This is where the large medical centers are located, the hospitals, and the population density in the state. What's interesting though is that as you start to look at patients, so this is a map of the patients in South Carolina, you see a lot more scattering in the more rural parts of the state. And so this is providers, patients, providers, patients. And this is nice because you see that a lot of patients in rural parts of the state are getting access to care from providers in those cities, and these patients are getting access to care, even in the most rural parts of the state. Uh, so patients are located in 249, that's 98.4% of cities and towns in South Carolina. And what's interesting is that Somerville, which is a suburb of Charleston, actually has the most unique patients of any other city or town in the state. You also see that Wade Hampton, which is a suburb of Greenville, is up there. Mount Pleasant is a suburb. And you see some other areas like Rock Hill, Simpsonville. A lot of these are suburbs of the bigger cities. And so again, we go back to this map, we see that the providers are located in those central areas where the hospital systems are, but the patients are located scattered throughout the state. And so it's a testament to the impact that telemedicine is having in the state, that it is reaching the far reaches of rural parts of the state of South Carolina, which is really cool to see. When we looked at, so we see that the patients are traveling, or they're not traveling, so the visits are happening in the locations that they're living. So again, this is Somerville. Also, what's interesting is Anderson is a hotspot as well. You see Anderson here, but when you see patients, you see a lot more in this area. Same thing with this spot up here. It's where patients are located. And Greenville's there as well, scattered up in where the patients live. So when we looked at this, we said, okay, so a lot of patients are staying home and they're not traveling into an in-person visit. And so we looked at, on every call, we know the distance between the provider and the patient. And we calculated that in the last 30 days, Doxy.me saved South Carolina residents from traveling 854,000 miles. So this is based upon, we know where the provider's located, we know where the patient's located, and we can calculate the mileage, the driving mileage between those two locations. And we saved patients, residents of South Carolina, 254,000 miles in just the last 30 days. So this accounts for 21,000 hours of time not spent traveling. If you take, how long does it take? The average car is driven 40 miles an hour. That's how we get to about 21,000 hours driven. That's an equivalent of 890 days of not traveling that has been saved for South Carolina residents. That accounts for 34,000 gallons of gasoline not used by residents in South Carolina, which accounts for over $100,000 not spent in gasoline. This is saving residents and citizens of South Carolina $100,000 in just the last 30 days, which is over $1 million a year, not spent in gasoline traveling from their home to see their provider in person. What's also interesting for those who want to know the environmental impact, this saved 669,000 pounds of CO2 were not emitted into the environment because of burning that gasoline and emitting CO2 emissions. 669,000 pounds of CO2. That's also equivalent to 304 metric tons of CO2 did not go into the environment in just this past month. So 1 metric ton is about the size of a house here in South Carolina. And so we just saved 304 metric tons, or 304 equivalent houses of South Carolina of CO2 did not get emitted into the environment because they used Doxy.me telemedicine to see their provider by video. It saves money, saves time, and it saves CO2 emissions going into the environment, which is very interesting and fascinating. We also started looking at providers providing care outside of South Carolina because we saw, well, a lot of care is happening inside of South Carolina, but then we said, well, what care is happening outside of South Carolina? And so this is a map of just providers in Charleston seeing patients outside of South Carolina. And we see that there are these hotspots of providers providing care to people all over the United States. This strong one is to LA and even further over into Hawaii. So people could be traveling. We see people up along the northeast coast border. So it could be people traveling to snowbirds going home for the summer and then coming back for the winter. So that could be happening here. And this is just providers in Charleston. When we open this up to the entire state of South Carolina, we get this huge splattering. So these are providers, every provider in South Carolina, and all the places that they are providing care to throughout the United States. It's a huge splattering that providers in South Carolina are exporting or serving patients all across the United States, which is very interesting and very fascinating that providers in South Carolina are having such a huge impact all across the United States and even the world. So we extended this out to the world and said, South Carolina providers, who are they providing care to all across the globe? And we see that these providers are caring for people all over the place. Australia, New Zealand, Latin America, Africa, Europe, India. So, and this has just been within the last month. Same thing with all this. This is just in the last month, Charleston providers across the United States, South Carolina providers across the United States just the last month, and South Carolina providers across the entire world in the last month. So pretty impressive that South Carolina providers are having such a global impact and global reach through connecting with patients by telemedicine using Doxy.me. So how does South Carolina rank compared to other states in this country? So California has by far the most visits. They've got about over 18 million visits, followed by Texas, New York, Florida. South Carolina did about 2.8 million provider sessions or visits, which that ranks us at about 21 in the country. If you look at just the population of, if you ranked South Carolina by the population in the US, we're number 23, so slightly above what our population average is. And this is on the map. And of course, you see California, Texas, Florida, New York. But if you look at the population, those are the states that have the largest population. So it's like, duh, Brandon, those states are going to have the most visits because they have the most people that live there. Yes, that does make sense. Now, if you account for the number of visits per capita, you see an interesting trend where South Carolina looks like it's doing less than Georgia and North Carolina. But when you look at the number of visits per capita, the number of sessions by the number of people in the population, South Carolina is right on par with North Carolina and even higher than Georgia, and largely on par with most of the other states in the country, including California. And what we see is that New England has a very high session per capita rate than any other place in the country, which is very fascinating. And Vermont is actually the highest. So if you look at calls per capita on the Doxy.me platform, Vermont is number one with 1.35, followed by Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island. Maine is right up there, Maryland, New Jersey. A lot of these northeastern states are huge users per capita. South Carolina falls in right at 23, right on par with where they're at in the country in terms of population, and rate slightly behind our neighbors to the north of North Carolina. And so, so South Carolina is just kind of on par average with where they should be. Not too high, not too low. So nothing concerning or interesting there. As we look at Doxy.me usage across the entire world, these are all the locations that patients have been where they've received care. So this is going beyond South Carolina now. looking at Doxyme usage across the entire globe, the entire world. And obviously, US has the lion's share of the usage. Europe, you see New Zealand is a hot spot. Philippines, India, Southeast Asia, um, Latin America, you see these hot spots. And so this is where patients are located who are receiving care through Doxyme. Overall, Doxyme as an overall platform worldwide has 1.1 million providers. They've delivered 4.2 billion minutes on the platform all time and have 192 million sessions have been conducted on the Doxyme platform. By comparison, South Carolina's got 14,000 providers, have done 50 million minutes, and this is billion, and have conducted 2.4 million sessions, I believe, if I got that right. So Doxyme, as you look at Doxyme compared to some of the other companies, it is selected as the most commonly used as reported to class by large enterprises. Telemedicine software used in the US and in the suburban population. Doxyme has about 36% of patients or providers, whatever, use Doxyme. And Zoom is right there coming up next. But what's interesting is that we see that this is Doxyme's #1 for suburban. We also see that in South Carolina, where I mentioned the Somerville, Mount Pleasant, the other parts of Greenville and Columbia and the suburban areas are highly used in those areas. Doxyme is very highly rated among providers, often performing very well in public reviews. So very highly rated compared to some of the other competitors in terms of satisfaction and market presence. Doxyme performs very well. And so we're very happy with the progress and with where we've got today, but we're not letting up either. There are a lot of things coming around the corner that we're excited about and a lot of things to look forward to for providers. So we're not just going to sit back, but we're going to keep pushing it. So one of the things that we've released recently, we're going to keep iterating on and adding improvements to is analytics. And so now as a provider, you can go look at your usage over time. So a lot of the analytics that I described in this presentation, you can go look and see how many sessions and minutes that you've conducted and also look at your all-time high and your averages. And so you can get all this information at your level as a provider, but as an organization, if you have a clinic or an enterprise account, you can look at your organization usage over time and all-time highs and dig in and look at the specific providers. We're also going to be, I've got the geographic map that I showed. That's going to be coming out in an upcoming release. So you can show where you're located, where all your patients are located and where you're having calls to, which is going to be very interesting. We are also adding the transfer capabilities. This is in beta, and some of our organizations here in the state already have access to this. But this allows you to transfer patients from one room to another. So if a patient checks in to one room, you can do like a pre-appointment review with a patient and then transfer them to the provider's room, or a provider can transfer them to somebody else's room. And so transfer is an often requested feature. And so we have that available in beta. And if you have a Doxyme account and you're interested in getting access to the transfer workflow, just reach out to your success manager and they can set it up on your account. This is going to be available to all clinic accounts, which is going to really help with workflows. And this is something that other products like Zoom and Epic and other telemedicine products don't have, is ability to transfer between rooms, which would make it very, very useful for providers who are looking for that, or organizations who are trying to support that transfer workflow. Just like it happens in the real clinic, you transfer people between rooms. You can do this now in the Doxyme platform, which is harder to do on the other platforms. Some of the other things that we're doing to be innovative and move ahead, and we're always thinking what's next, what's coming next, is there's a lot of interest in virtual reality. And we actually just received a grant from the NIH to study and build out the virtual reality capabilities for Doxyme. So providers who want to do virtual reality will be able to have a headset on, and their patient will be able to have a headset on, one of these Oculus headsets, and they'll be able to enter a virtual reality Doxy.me room. So right now, Doxy.me is 2D, two dimension. It's just video, audio and video. Soon you'll be able to put on a headset and actually enter a virtual reality space. And so it's your Doxy.me room, but in virtual reality, where you can meet with a patient. And this is actually a prototype of an actual one of our providers, or it's actually a researcher team having an actual meeting in one of these virtual reality rooms. And so we're going to be, we got a grant from the government to keep building this out, and you'll see features like this rolling out. That how are we going to push it, and really what's around the next corner in telemedicine, and how can we make telemedicine even better? And what's interesting about this is with virtual reality, this is particularly appealing to those who are in the mental health space, because if you're working with somebody that's afraid of heights or afraid of flying or afraid of spiders or whatever, in this virtual reality space, you can introduce them into that environment. Exposure therapy is an important therapeutic modality. And so if you're helping somebody overcome their fear of spiders, in this virtual reality space, you can introduce a spider in the corner of the room, and they can get accustomed to reducing their anxiety, get used to it, and they're safe. They're not dealing with real spiders, but it's helping them overcome and cope with these things. And so if you have somebody that's a fear of heights, you can take them in virtual reality. You can go from this room, talk about it, and then introduce them to a tall building where they get exposure to that space, and you can be there virtually introducing them and going through this therapeutic modality in virtual reality where it's completely safe. And so there's some very interesting things that you can do with virtual reality that are coming around the corner that our team is working on. We're also introducing bots. We have a product called DocBot that we've been building, and we're going to be introducing that into Doxy.me. So as a patient checks in, it's going to be greeted by a bot checking them in. Hey, what's your name? And with these bots, you can start adding things like, we're going to collect an assessment. So we can do an intake form where you do like a PHQ-9 assessment, or you could do when patient checks in, they have to fill out a form. Well, you can have a bot collect all that information. And even if you need to collect a copayment or check insurance, the bots are going to automate the whole check-in process. So right now we might have an office assistant or a front desk person doing all this manual stuff. The bots are going to be able to come in and automate all that stuff for the providers in the organization. So the bots will collect the information, automatically store it, and then check the person in, introduce them to the waiting room. So it's really going to we're automating a lot of things, a lot of the workflow around virtual care. And checking in and processing stuff. You don't need a human to necessarily do all that manual stuff. We can get the bots to do a lot of this stuff. So you're going to see the bots. We also got a grant from the government to introduce a lot of the bots into Doxy.me and expand that type of usage. We're already doing things with bots at MUSC. For different care, like follow-up care and checking in on patients, and if they do need help, we can triage them. And so we're already prototyping it in a medical center here in South Carolina. And as this continues to show efficacy, we're going to roll it out onto the larger platform. So that's another feature that's going to be nice and available on the Doxy.me platform. We also have a product called Adherely, which is to help patients adhere to treatment, homework, and therapy. And so it's specifically targets in the mental health space to remind them to do relaxation, or remind them to practice some coping exercise or exposure therapy. And it's a product called Adherely. This Adherely product also received a grant from the government, and we're working to integrate that into Doxy.me as well. So as you use Doxy.me and you want to send a reminder or to practice something with the patient, one of the Adherely exercises, or you want to schedule a reminder to do that exercise, you can use the Doxy.me interface to do that. So within the Doxy.me call, you can schedule, you can practice, you can schedule these activities. This is an example of a breathing exercise that you can practice with a patient during a call, and then you can send the reminder for the patient to do it at home. So they get a link by text message, they click it, and then they can practice the exercise midweek. And so it's a good, effective way to get patients to adhere to these treatment exercises between sessions. And again, this is something that Doxy.me is building and will be integrated into the platform. So there's a lot of really cool things that we're doing that's going to make the provider's life easier. And so as more people continue to use Doxy.me, we've got great usage across South Carolina, across the country, across the world. We're going to continue to add these features and capabilities that really help and support providers in providing care so they can be as effective as possible. And the key thing is that we are a healthcare company. We focus solely on healthcare providers. And so we are focused on the workflow, optimizing the workflow for providers. We're not just any other video platform like Zoom or WebEx that works for boardrooms or education or just family get-togethers. We are only for healthcare providers and organizations, so we are focused highly on the workflows and the needs of providers, making their life easier. And over the next couple months and years, you're going to see some great features coming out that will really make the provider's life easier and organizations more efficient and effective through telemedicine. And it's all made possible through people using Doxy.me for video day to day. But because of that, we're able to support innovation and do a lot of these cool things that are coming around the corner. So that's Doxy.me. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. We have a team based here in Charleston and other parts of the state. And if you're interested in the data and digging into data more, our data analyst is here in Charleston, and I'm happy to connect him with you to answer any further questions or dig in deeper on any South Carolina data that you're interested in. So thank you so much for your time.